I am ready.
Okay. Well, good evening, attendees. The numbers are creeping up a little bit too, so maybe I should slow down a second. Welcome to our, April Equipped Live. My name's Jackie, for those of you that do not know. Today we are going to be talking about the teams of 7 and some of the leadership support and growing people into those leadership positions. So without further ado, we're going to get Greg live and we're going to talk to him about that topic. Hi, Greg.
Hello, Jackie. Hello, everyone.
All right, so we are going to talk about this mysterious teams of 7 concept. So it seems in the last year or so, and you can correct me if that timeline is not quite a year or a little over a year, but the goal in the IFMC has been to get to a place where there are teams of 7, so one leader with no more than 7 on that team. What is the thought process behind that move?
Well, the thought process is really based on a thing called Dunbar's number and another concept called magical number 7. And Dunbar's number was developed by an anthropologist by the name of Robin Dunbar. And essentially, he was studying the relationship between human brain size and organization size, and what the optimum number of stable relationships are that the typical human could have. And so that was Robin Dunbar and his Dunbar's number. George Miller developed what's called the magical number of 7, and he was a psychologist. He was studying the number of objects that an average human could hold in working memory or in short-term memory. And of course, as you might guess, the magical number 7, that number ended up being 7 plus or minus 2. Dunbar's number was 150 plus or minus 50. And I could go into a whole bunch more detail, but that's the concept behind those numbers. And we've chosen to focus on groups of 7, which it turns out, Jackie, that's we've been using that since probably the 80s. So it's been around a long time. And the way we've used it is we've chosen to use that primarily as the first rungs of the leadership ladder within the IFMC. And typically the way we do that is we'll form small teams of about 7. We'll intentionally just watch for who develops in that group as the informal go-to person. And once somebody develops into kind of an informal go-to person, that's a pretty good indication that the rest of the members in that group really respect that person's competency related to the work that team is doing, trust what that person is saying, and just informally start accessing that person's knowledge, etc. And so that happens kind of organically. Once we recognize that, then the idea is to more formally establish that person as a leader. And if they do well, more formally established as a leader, then we'll try to bump the group size up to maybe 10 or 12. And that really separates then the leaders that are able to lead through example from the ones that are able to lead by example and through communication. And that's critical because with the larger groups, the leader needs to behave differently than the rest of the team members. And so they need to be able to communicate in a way that's believable, that they really are working. It's just not doing the same thing that the rest of the team is doing. And once they can lead a larger group, that means they can probably lead other leaders because they know how to lead with communication. And so that's the pathway that we've developed and we've been practicing in the IFMC. And essentially the intent there is to just create the conditions that enable the leaders to grow organically within the organization.
So and I think a lot of people are aware that leadership is one of my areas of passion and focus. And what I see with businesses that I work with is there's a big gap between somebody who is the go-to person and very good at their task. And so people go to them and ask them questions and they can help them with that. But then to actually lead people is a big leap. So what does the IFMC do to help develop some of those leadership competencies in newer upcoming leaders that go beyond, and I think you may be referring to it as leading with communication, but that go beyond being very good at the task that they do or with a skill that they've mastered into truly leading other human beings?
Well, as I had said, we're trying to create the conditions that allow the leaders to grow just kind of organically or naturally. We can certainly create those opportunities to lead and create pathways to greater responsibility. That if the leaders are stretching the other folks on their team so that they're always in just a little bit over their head, that really does give the opportunity then for more one-on-one coaching with the existing leader that incentivizes communications with other peers and other experienced leaders as well as their own. And so that again is more of that organic self-teaching, if you will. But in addition to that, of course, we've got the training workshops. We've got that ESI has been involved with. And on Microsoft Teams, there's the Microsoft Teams, what is that called? It's called Leading Teams, I guess. And last time I checked, there's over 80 folks participating in that.
Yeah, that is a great resource for people to connect with one another about leadership, because leadership is a very unique animal. It's difficult to manage. So what types of things can an individual do? We talk about self-learning and growing. So if somebody's interested in becoming one of those leaders, what types of competencies should they be displaying and really starting to master to become one of those leaders that we're identifying?
Well, that's not a one answer fits all. It really depends on, is the team fighting a fire or fighting in a war, or are they building a 100-year company or a company that's going to be here in 100 years? And so there's some differences in tactics, differences in the way that those leaders need to behave. So as you can imagine, I mean, if you're fighting a fire, that really is more appropriate to have autocratic type leadership. You're barking out orders. You're not trying to do things by consensus. You just need to get it done. If you're building a company and a team that you want to survive for 100 years, you probably want to do more things through consensus, through stretching people through some of the things that we've talked about already. So there's not one answer that fits all, but some of the things that do apply, I think, universally are that we should be watching for folks that are living by the golden rule. And of course, the golden rule is treat others as you want to be treated. The other thing that I think is really important here is for someone to find persistent customer needs and become really competent at solving that particular need. And if somebody's competent at solving a customer problem and they're uniquely capable of that, they will become the informal go-to person. And Of course, now they need to be a problem solver. They need to have good communication skills. And those are all kind of universally applicable, I think, to any sorts of leadership situations. If you look at organizations in general, organizations tend to get started by a group of people who realize that if they work together, they can accomplish something that otherwise they wouldn't be able to accomplish. And so they form an organization. Within that organization, it's almost universal. There will be the most competent people that are going to rise to the top. Now, that doesn't that sometimes gets a little confusing because there is politics that do get involved in organizations. There are some people that are very assertive and try to use their position power, et cetera, to force things to go in directions that maybe aren't really optimum. But if the environment exists to let the leaders grow organically, what you typically are going to find is the folks with the greatest competency related to the work that organization is doing are the ones that end up at the top of the organization.
So regarding the IFMC, are there still teams that are existing that the effort is currently undergoing to break them into smaller teams of 7? Where kind of across the IFMC, can you paint a picture for us as to how this is currently applied and what work needs to be done moving forward?
Well, that's a little bit challenging to do, Jackie, because the intent is to break the work up into groups of 7. In some cases where we have maybe different types of equipment, different types of processes, that's a nice goal to have, but it doesn't fit real well with the actual day-to-day needs. So we need to be able to adjust for that. Excuse me. But the next challenge really is that there's no nice bright line between when someone becomes an informal go-to person. And so that kind of happens naturally. And now the leader that's overseeing that team really needs to be paying attention to that, trying to recognize the informal go-to people, but then needs to have the right opportunities to make maybe a more formal transition. And so it's kind of like a North Star, if you will, that's something we should be shooting for, but that changes over time, and different people are developing. Some are developing pretty rapidly. Some get shifted to other teams, etc. So it's kind of fluid.
Okay. And before we get to any final thoughts that you have, just one more question. What would you say is currently the biggest challenge in meeting or working toward that North Star of having teams of 7? What is the biggest challenge that the IFMC faces going in that direction?
Well, I think the challenge probably is that we grew very rapidly. And when you grow back within the last couple of years, when you grow very rapidly, it's hard to break things up because we're already relying pretty heavily on the experienced folks. And so I think that growth probably is one of the biggest challenges. And then when you have big variations in workload. So with some of the business units, we've been through a couple of years of just unbelievable growth, followed by pretty rapid decline. And so managing all of that becomes a challenge. But yeah, I think, again, if we use that teams of 7 as a North Star, we can every day keep moving a little closer to that, and there'll be some setbacks, but that's probably the greatest challenge.
Okay. And when we do the new employee orientation, one of the things I tell them is the mission, vision, and core values. That's sort of a roadmap for people if they want to move up in the organization and maybe become a leader. Those are some really key points for them to keep in mind. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. And I
Okay.
think that that's kind of where the golden rule applies too. You know, a
Hmm.
lot of that, a lot of the core values are aligned with the golden rule.
Yeah, sometimes instead of the golden rule, I just say don't be a jerk. That works too, right?
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, Greg, thank you for enlightening us on this topic. Do you have any final thoughts on this or final comments?
Well, I would just encourage people to, whether you're interested in leadership or not, always apply the golden rule. For those that are interested in leadership, uh, find a persistent customer problem, solve it, and if that truly is a persistent problem that needs to be solved, that likely increases the probability that you're going to end up as an informal go-to person. And then I'd encourage you to study level 5 leadership, which that really comes from Jim Collins in his book Good to Great, and he does a really nice job of laying out the different types of leaders and the types of leaders that build great companies, and he compares good to great and kind of dissects that. And of course, we're trying to build great companies. So I think if we do those things well, I think the IFMC will become a leadership development machine.
All right. Well, as I said, Greg, thank you so much for giving us some more information on this topic. I know it's something that people were curious about and wanted to learn more about. So I think this was very valuable. Thank you. And everybody who's attending today, thanks for watching us live.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.